This is the second part of my interview with Alistair Croll, and now we will explain lean analytics in the context of marketplaces and platforms. If you haven't watched part 1, please check it out since we spoke about the definition of good metrics and how to avoid vanity metrics. The video links are on the description below. You have a chapter on your book about two-sided markets, which is one of the business model that you explain. And can you give some tips about how to use lean analytics framework? Then we can later on we can talk about the framework. But how can you use it on this two-sided market context?
So the reason we talk about different business models, and there are really three fundamental e-commerce business models. There's transactional, which is where someone buys and sells something. There is media, where someone clicks on an ad, and then there's subscription-based, where someone pays for consumption. And broadly, things fall into those three categories. There are some edge cases like charities and so on. But a two-sided marketplace is a transactional market where the business makes a percentage of every match. So you could include everything from a dating site in there to eBay or Craigslist or Kijiji or any one of the other two-sided markets. The biggest lesson about two-sided markets is what I call the cabbage lesson. Let me ask you a question. You're about to open a two-sided market for cabbages. You can either have 1,000 cabbages or 1,000 cabbage buyers when you start this market. Which one would you rather have?
1,000 cabbages.
You'd rather have 1,000 cabbages.
Well, the buyers won't come if I don't have the cabbages, right?
Right. But how easy is it for you to get some cabbages?
Yeah, that's the chicken or the egg problem.
But no, it's super easy. You can go to the market. Eric Ries had a conversation with someone about a rubber two-sided market for the rubber industry. And the guy said, I can't use lean for this because rubber trees take 15 years to grow. And Eric said, no, you're just going to buy a lot of rubber trees. The risk is whether you can attract people to an active market. The risk is not, can you buy 1,000 cabbages? I can go buy 1,000 cabbages. If you give me an hour, I can literally go get 1,000 cabbages. How many days is it going to take me to find 1,000 cabbage buyers? Right? So where is the risk in a two-sided marketplace? Is it that I can acquire inventory or that I can acquire customers? It's always customers, which means that the biggest risk in a two-sided marketplace is, can you create sustainable demand? When Bezos launched Amazon, he did it with books. What's good about books, right? They're cheap to ship. There's a very long tail of inventory. So he found an ideal market to test products. The cost of a false positive or false negative recommendation is fairly low. He was able to shake out all of the logistics in that field. And so the biggest lesson of all for two-sided marketplaces is the same lesson for any startup. Find the biggest risk and see if you can get rid of it. And the biggest risk in a cabbage marketplace is, are there 1,000 cabbage buyers? Are there 1,000 cabbages is not the risk. When someone comes to me and says, I have a marketplace for jewelry, I have an uncle in India who's been making jewelry, I'm like, I don't care. You have a jewelry retailer at best. But if someone comes to me and says, I have 10,000 Instagram followers who are clamoring to buy jewelry from me and my friends. Oh, you have demand? Now I'm interested. And so, number one lesson in any lean thing is identify and mitigate the biggest risk. In a two-sided marketplace, the biggest risk is demand because you can fake supply. When Reddit started, the founders of Reddit would create all kinds of fake posts because they just basically were listing links.
How do you measure inventory? Do you consider the cabbage buyers listings or profiles an inventory of a platform?
So if I were testing the minimum viable cabbage market, and this is why I like the example of cabbage, because it's so stupid that it forces you to think about the business model and not your uncle who has a link to the jewelry industry or something. Um, and I've seen so many two. I literally went on a bunch of speaking gig a couple of years ago to three different accelerators, and every one of them had a dog walking marketplace. Like there's three of three. That's awful, right? Um, so I think that you have to create supply, and then you look at searches as an indicator of demand. So when you and one of the rankings that is like, how well are you doing in SEO? When someone says, I really want to buy a cabbage, do you show up? And what's the cost of the keywords? So in a two-sided marketplace, your business metrics will eventually become cost of customer acquisition, right? Which is what it takes to get someone searching on your site. Number of searches that produce at least one viable result. So if I'm searching for a sailboat, I want to make sure at least one sailboat shows up. And then conversion rate when those two things happen. So if I see a sailboat, how likely am I to buy the sailboat? And then what's my take? So the percentage I make off the transaction. If I was going to look at a spreadsheet, those are the 4 rows I would expect to see in the spreadsheet. Cost of acquiring, number of searches, number of conversions, percentage I take out of that. And so you have to simulate that as much as possible in order to test the market with analytics.
Okay. And what can you do to? I mean, how can you measure your efforts to build audience? Because once the participants of the platform are in the platform, they are connecting to each other. It's easier to measure them. What are some metrics you could be useful to?
I would start with a newsletter. Honestly, I spoke at a conference called Lean UX a few years ago, and they wanted to run a conference in a lean style. What's the biggest risk if you're running a conference?
Nobody is showing up.
Right, biggest risk. What's the first thing conference organizers do?
They make sure they spread the word and advertise.
No, they book a location. What's the least risky thing you can do in a conference? Booking a location. You call someone up and say, "Can I have a location?" And they give you a location, right? I have complete control over that. So the whole conference industry is backwards. And so they said, "Okay, we are going to start a mailing list. If we can get the mailing list to 1,000 people, we'll move to the next step." So they got the mailing list to 1,000 people talking about UX. They said, "Okay, we're going to sell conditional tickets." This is using a tool called Pick a Tick, where you buy a ticket, but you're only billed if they hit a certain number, just like Kickstarter. They said, if we can sell 300 tickets, we'll run the event. So they sold 300 tickets. They said, okay, great. We got to get some speakers. Notice how they're getting riskier and riskier. Like, it's probably okay they can get speakers. It's not clear whether they can sell tickets. So they mailed a bunch of speakers, including me. And they said, hey, we'd like you to come here. We will pay for your airfare, your hotel, and a bottle of scotch. And like, the bottle of scotch was their test of like, we think that's the right amount of money. And the book had just come out like a year before. I said, okay, fine, I'll come. Do your thing. Then they said, okay, now we're going to put up a website saying, hey, we've sold 300 tickets, and these are our speakers. And they sold some more tickets, right? So now they had about 700 tickets. They needed a venue. So they found a venue that was that could handle 700 people. And all they'd said in the original tickets was, we're going to do an event within 25 miles of downtown Manhattan within a week of this date. So then they went back to people and said, hey, now we've announced the venue and the date. You're welcome to cancel if you want. And like 5% of people canceled. And that's the biggest risk. That moment was the biggest risk, right? 5% of people canceled their tickets. That's fine. They're still profitable. They sold a few more. They ran the event. Where's the risk? Biggest risk is everybody cancels their tickets when you announce the venue. That's the biggest risk, right? But by then, you've already created how great the conference looks. People have set that week aside. You've done it far enough in advance. That's how to de-risk. So if I was running a marketplace, start a newsletter about cabbages, have some links to, cabbages sold elsewhere, or, cabbage reviews or whatever, and then see how many of them get click-throughs. And now you know, okay, hey, here's a web page. You can sign up for some cabbages. Sign up here and we'll let you know when they're available. And you count the signups. And how many people say, call me when you got 10 cabbages? I'd like some. None of that takes risk, barely even takes coding. And it will tell you right away if you're wasting everybody's time and money. And yet people don't do this stuff because you know what? It's hard. It's not sexy. You go back to your computer science grad friends and say, what did you do in your startup? Well, I set up a bunch of mailing lists until one of them worked. They'll be like, why'd you go to computer science? But I guarantee you, you're doing better than those of them that are working for someone else on a bad idea that'll never see the light of day.
On the next and last part of my interview with Alistair Croll, author of the bestseller Lean Analytics, we will talk about the importance of having a single metric. Why it's so important narrowing down all the efforts to move a single needle that will move all the rest. All the links are on the description of this video below.